He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and for today's episode, we're diving back into the newspapers. That is right, specifically for hauntings and ghost reports. Definitely not the type of reports that make their way onto the pages of modern-day newspapers, that's for sure. However, before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca. You can also visit us on our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and check us out on Patreon, where you can get ad-free early episodes available there. And lastly, should you want to reach us directly, send us an email via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this format, basically I source a bunch of random newspaper articles affiliated with the episode's topic, in this case, hauntings. However, if that doesn't interest you, on our main feeds we have multiple other newspaper episodes focusing on Bigfoot, Dogman, Mothman, and even some Thunderbird reports as well. But to start us off today, our first haunting. And I quote, "Child's death in haunted house." This is the Western Gazette, April 8th, 1921. Ghost that returned when her brother came back. The strange happenings at the Hormsey's so-called haunted house are said to have caused the death of Muriel Frost, the 5-year-old daughter of the occupier. Muriel took no notice of manifestations until a chair fell over near her, and the fright caused her to bite her tongue. Since then, she has been extremely nervous, and this accentuated the effects of a short illness, which has just proved fatal. After her older brother, Gordon, returned home and rejoined another brother last week, the events which preceded his departure on a holiday again occurred. They continued until Thursday morning, when the lads were sent to a neighbor's house. So what can we dissect from this? In short, it seems these hauntings started when the brothers were reunited and stopped when they departed. So is this a case of hauntings, perhaps a person themselves being haunted, or simply a series of pranks throughout then executed by the brothers that really ended particularly horrifically? I reckon we won't ever really know, unfortunately, in regards to this, but it's still questionable nonetheless. Next up, we have an article from December 20th, 1879. The Haunted Cottage near Chard. Plymouth paper says, "In March last, an old man named Churchill was murdered in a cottage near Chard. For some time after the execution, the building remained uninhabited, but at length it was let to a laborer and his family. But the incomers soon found they could obtain no rest. They state that the murderess, Kitty, has been frequently seen to glide about the premises in ghostly attire, and that old Churchill has been distinctly observed to look in at the window with hideous countenance. This, added to the appearance of blood on the floor of the room in which the tragedy was enacted, supernatural movements amongst the furniture, and other articles, and unearthly noises in the immediate vicinity of the cottage, has unsettled the occupants. They at last abandoned the dwelling, which is now regarded as haunted." This is a freak one, specifically because of how the specifics can coincide with other hauntings. I often believe to some degree that seeing apparitions and manifestations maybe a result of a spirit reenacting the moments before their death or around their time of death. And these two spirits, they don't seem to be a part of each other, if that makes sense. What I mean is, Churchill is viewing in from the outside, almost as if he's scared to come inside. Be at peace, he could say, because this evil spirit is floating around on the inside, perhaps looking for him or other household inhabitants that are therefore living. But you have objects moving around, that blood that appeared. I wish I could speak better to that. Whilst the object moving is a witnessed occurrence still to this day in many hauntings, the blood on the floor is a clear sign to exit the premises, if you ask me. But I digress. Our next clipping is from the Leeds Mercury, August 25th, 1904. A troublesome ghost haunts an old Richmond inn. A ghost is haunting the old Cobwell's Hostelry, Richmond, Surrey. Latterly, the ghost has appeared in the top floor room in which the manager of the hotel sleeps. In an interview with an evening news representative, he told a remarkable story of the apparition. Twice shortly after midnight, he said, just when I have gone asleep, I have awakened to hear noises such as I have never heard before in my life. They are sounds which are so foreign to any experience that I have had that it is impossible for me to describe them. I found myself in a cold sweat, shivering all over. As soon as my eyes have become accustomed to the darkness, I realized that there was someone in the room besides myself. I waited, restless, not daring to speak, to see what would happen next. Presently, something has stolen out of the gloom and flourished brilliant lights in my face. Then a wild, non-human being has gradually appeared. Spellbound, I've not dared to move. Screeching and moaning, it has wandered around the room and then vanished. I've then got out of bed, searched the room all over, rushed down into the vault, explored every nook and corner, but all to no purpose. To show that I have not imagined all this, let me tell you that on Monday morning, the screeches attracted the attention of the police, who imagined that somebody was being murdered here. An officer came to the front door to inquire what the matter was, and we told him that the house was haunted by a ghost. The police are investigating the weird affair, but they are as mystified as we are. Now, what is it like? Question mark. The ghost is a long, luminous figure, dressed in some flimsy white and blue material. We have parties sitting up nightly to search for it. If I see it again, I shall shoot at it. The only theory I have to explain for the presence of the ghost is that it is a wraith of the sailor who many years ago was robbed and murdered in this inn. It is either his ghost or that of Kate Webster, whose hand hangs up in the back room. Kate, you know, murdered her mistress in Richmond by boiling her in a copper and then heaving her body into the Thames. The other night, Mrs. Luff, the landlord's wife, left alone to herself, was nearly terrified to death by the screeches. Mr. George Luff, the landlord, confirmed the manager's story and said he himself saw the mysterious reflections of light about the house. A young lady who saw the weird figure from the window of her bedroom in the quadrant, the backs of the houses of which almost faced the front of the inn, said she distinctly heard the screams and saw the figure, although it only stayed for a few minutes. She was very much terrified and could not sleep. Yes, it is quite true, she added. The strange affair has caused a sensation in the district, and curious crowds are flocking all day to the hotel. Now, I love when stories begin to incorporate the police. Now, while I can't speak to the police reports as I don't have any evidence of any such related documents for this case, having government intervention of any kind always gets me giddy. And I'm sure some sort of paperwork existed at the time for police working on this case. Could this be a well thought out hoax? Oh, absolutely. If you don't have enough customers and your hotel is starting to lose money, a ghost story is a great way back then and even today to generate revenue if you go public about it. But it's not always easy to fool everyone, including police. And the specifics around the sighting, the first visualization, it just reminds me of the orbs, balls of light, then morphs into this apparition. It's very curious. Women in white are a prominent ghostly figure seen around the world. And while this figure was reportedly in some white, it was also mixed with a bluish color as well. And with that, we're going to jump to a quick ad break, and we will be right back. And we're back. So let's see what our next story is. 1878, the Banbury Advertiser, a genuine ghost story. Whilst I was residing at Maulmain, I saw a ghost with my own eyes in broad daylight, of which I could make an affidavit. I had an old schoolfellow, who was afterwards a college friend, with whom I had lived in the closest intimacy. Years, however, had passed away without our seeing each other. And one morning, I had just got out of bed and was dressing myself when suddenly my old friend entered the room. I greeted him warmly, told him to call for a cup of tea in the veranda, and promised to be with him immediately. So I dressed myself in all haste, went out into the veranda, but found no one there. I could not believe my eyes. I called to the sentry, who was posted at the front of the house, but he had seen no strange gentleman that morning. The servants also declared that no such person had entered the house. Now, I was certain I had seen my friend. I was not thinking about him at the time, yet I was not taken by surprise. As steamers and other vessels were frequently arriving at Maulmain, a footnote afterwards, news arrived that he had died 600 miles off, about the very time I saw him at Maulmain. It is useless to comment upon this story. To this day, I've never doubted that I really saw the ghost of my deceased friend. This is from Lieutenant General Albert Fitch. This is not the first time I've heard of someone passing and also appearing as a manifestation somewhere else. To me, it's not even really a haunting. It's more like a send-off of sorts. While still paranormal nonetheless, the fact that it's more officialized of a statement, again, not an affidavit, but his rank definitely holds credibility. Being a lieutenant general, this had occurred in Maulmain, Burma, which is now known as Myanmar. Sorry, I apologize. I hope I pronounced that correctly. For our next newspaper haunting, we're looking at the Lebanon Pioneer, May 13th, 1886. This location is occupied by officers of the city of Lebanon, specifically the mayor's office. And it's quite funny, honestly, how many government buildings are supposedly haunted. It's a very concurrent theme amongst many cities, especially many here in British Columbia. But I digress. A headless specter creates a sensation on the south side. On the second lot south of the railroad, on the east side of the Meridian Street, stands an old weather-beaten house belonging to D.A. Caldwell, which, it is alleged, is haunted, and that a veritable ghost, a headless woman, visits the place between 12 and 1 o'clock at night. The house, if now occupied by Wyatt Myers and family, Mr. Myers' oldest son was awakened by the aforesaid ghost rubbing her icy hands over his face. The sight which he saw was so frightful that he was paralyzed with fear, and did not dare to uncover his head again that night, and could not be induced to sleep again in the room. When this visitation from the land of the unreal was made public, the neighbors began to refresh their memories. The house had been occupied for some time previous to the time Mr. Myers moved in by an old clock repairer and tinker by the name of Mozingo, who had several children of his own, and a girl about 16 years old whom they claimed was adopted by them in Tennessee. The neighbors missed the girl several days before the Mozingos made a night move from the city. No one knows where. Mozingos accounted for her absence by saying that they had sent her back to Tennessee on a night train. The spectral vision of young Myers and the presence of bloodstains in the haunted rooms strengthened the suspicions of the neighbors that she had been murdered and her body disposed of by the Mozingos. Captain Thomas J. Cook at once organized a searching committee and has been fishing in the wells in the neighborhood and turning up the dirt, but without success. Pete Trips and Jesse Lame, who had a longing to see a real live ghost, spent Friday night in the room, but the only disturbance they report was that of an old cat trying to break through the window. and the racket of myriad of rats as well. So, again, we have come to an encounter where blood has appeared. Now, I wouldn't speculate this as being paranormally manifested, but more so evidence that was discovered of a previous killing. In the floors, or be stained on a wall or something like that. And the fact is that it was found in the rooms that are the most haunted in the house. Without further standing to the paranormal activity and possibly unfortunate past that has occurred in this house. But with all that, I hope you feel nice and spooked on the crisp and brisk November day it is today. We'll be returning on Monday. Ruben and I are going to be diving into some more hauntings. I believe we're going to try and get into some actual asylums. But until then, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and our Patreon for ad-free early episodes. And if you want to reach out to us directly, you can via CryptidClues@gmail.com. So until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.